Welcome to Unveiling the Darkness, a series dedicated to exploring the lives of history's most notorious dictators. Idi Amin's reign was marked by brutality, oppression, and absurd behavior. Join us as we delve into the life of Idi Amin, a dictator whose eccentricities were as alarming as his atrocities. Why are there not more people talking about the bizarre yet contradicting sides of Idi Amin? In the heart of Africa, a name still echoes with a chilling resonance: Idi Amin. He was a man of contradictions, a figure both alluring and repulsive. Amin's life was a tapestry woven with threads of charisma and cruelty, ambition and madness. To understand him is to journey into the darkness of tyranny, to confront the depths of human capacity for both good and evil. His story is not just a tale of one man, but a stark reminder of the fragility of freedom and the enduring cost of unchecked power. Idi Amin's erratic foreign policy is exemplified in a letter he wrote to US President Richard Nixon during the Watergate scandal. The letter, dated and addressed with a mix of patronizing concern and bizarre advice, highlighted Amin's unique diplomatic approach and grandiose self-perception. Dear President, it now appears clearly from the latest developments that the leadership of your government will not recover from the scandal of the Watergate affair. The best chance, therefore, for the United States of America to restore its dignity in the world is to have a new leadership, which should have a majority of black Americans in it. Although the present executive leadership of the United States of America is against me, they should know that I am not at all against them or the United States. In fact, as far as we in Uganda are concerned, we do not hold any ill feelings against the United States of America, and whatever criticisms we have labelled against the United States have been constructive and based on truth and a deep sense of friendly concern. An American government having a majority of black representatives will be assured of big support in the non-aligned world, in which about 2,000 million people live. By the same token, the problems that America faces domestically will be considerably reduced, if not solved altogether. Idi Amin. It is a story that demands to be told, not to glorify a tyrant, but to understand how such monstrous regimes take root and how their legacies continue to haunt the present. We will delve into the life of Idi Amin, peeling back the layers of myth and propaganda to uncover the man behind the monster. The year 1962 marked a pivotal moment in Uganda's history. The nation finally threw off the shackles of British colonialism, stepping tentatively into the uncharted waters of independence. Milton Obote, a charismatic leader, emerged from the struggle for self-determination as Uganda's first Prime Minister. He promised unity, progress, and an end to the divisive legacy of colonial rule. Obote, recognizing Amin's military acumen and ruthlessness, saw in him a valuable, if dangerous, ally. Amin, in turn, saw an opportunity to consolidate his own power base. He quickly became a key figure in Obote's government, utilizing his military experience to suppress dissent and consolidate the new regime's grip on power. A dangerous alliance was forged, one that would have devastating consequences for Uganda. However, the seeds of mistrust and ambition were already taking root. Amin, never content to remain in the shadows, grew increasingly resentful of his subordinate position. He coveted power, and his ambition would soon pit him against his former ally. The stage was set for a brutal power struggle, one that would plunge Uganda into an abyss of violence and terror. The relationship between Obote and Amin soured rapidly, fueled by paranoia, political maneuvering, and Amin's insatiable hunger for power. Obote, growing wary of Amin's growing influence and fearing a coup, attempted to sideline his former protégé. He ordered an investigation into Amin's alleged corruption and his role in the brutal suppression of opposition groups. But Obote had underestimated Amin's ruthlessness and his ability to strike first. On January 25, 1971, while Obote was attending a Commonwealth conference in Singapore, disaster struck. Exploiting Obote's absence and capitalizing on the simmering discontent within the army, Idi Amin launched his coup d'etat. Tanks rolled through the streets of Kampala, the capital city. as Amin's forces seized control of key government buildings and communication networks. The coup was swift and brutal. Amin, using a combination of cunning and brute force, outmaneuvered his opponents, consolidating his grip on power with ruthless efficiency. Obote, caught off guard and fearing for his life, fled into exile, leaving a power vacuum that Amin was all too eager to fill. The reign of the dictator had begun. In the immediate aftermath of the coup, Amin projected an image of stability and national unity. He promised to restore order, end corruption, and usher in an era of prosperity for all Ugandans. Many, weary of political turmoil and economic hardship, welcomed Amin's promises, hoping for a brighter future under his leadership. But beneath the veneer of stability, a darker reality was taking shape. Amin, intoxicated by power and driven by paranoia, swiftly moved to consolidate his control, silencing any opposition with an iron fist. Political opponents, journalists, and anyone perceived as a threat to his rule were rounded up, tortured, and disappeared. A climate of fear and suspicion descended upon Uganda as the nation began its descent into darkness. Idi Amin's origins remain shrouded in mystery, a deliberate obscurity cultivated by the dictator himself. Born in the remote West Nile region of Uganda, near the border with Sudan, his date of birth is estimated to be somewhere between 1925 and 1928. His birth records, like much of his early life, are either lost to time or deliberately obfuscated. Amin's childhood was one of poverty and hardship. Born into the Kakwa ethnic group, a relatively small and marginalized community in Uganda, he received little formal education. His father, a farmer, abandoned the family when Amin was young, leaving him to be raised by his mother, a traditional herbalist. These early years, marked by instability and a lack of opportunity, would leave an indelible mark on the young Amin, shaping his worldview and fueling his relentless ambition. Growing up in the shadow of British colonialism, Amin witnessed firsthand the injustices and inequalities inherent in the system. The British, while claiming to bring civilization and progress to Africa, had imposed a rigid racial hierarchy that relegated Africans to second-class status. Amin, like many of his generation, chafed under this oppressive system, harboring a deep resentment that would later manifest itself in his brutal treatment of those he perceived as collaborators with the colonial regime. Despite his lack of formal education, Amin possessed a natural cunning and charisma that set him apart from his peers. He was a gifted athlete, excelling in boxing and rugby, and his physical prowess earned him both respect and fear. Even at a young age, Amin displayed a ruthless streak, a willingness to use violence to assert his dominance and achieve his goals. In 1946, at the age of 18, Amin saw an opportunity to escape the poverty of his upbringing and carve a path for himself. He enlisted in the King's African Rifles, KAR, the British colonial army responsible for maintaining order in East Africa. The KAR, while offering a steady income and a chance to see the world, was also a brutal institution, steeped in the racial prejudices of the British Empire. Amin, despite the inherent racism and discrimination he faced as an African soldier, thrived in this harsh environment. He was a quick learner, mastering military skills with ease, and his physical strength and imposing physique made him a formidable soldier. He quickly rose through the ranks, gaining a reputation for his bravery in combat against Somali insurgents in the Shifta War, and his ruthlessness in suppressing dissent among fellow African soldiers. Amin's service in the KR was a transformative experience, shaping his worldview and laying the foundation for his future rise to power. He learned the art of warfare, not just in terms of tactics and strategy, but also in the brutal realities of colonial oppression. He witnessed firsthand the casual cruelty with which the British treated their African subjects, and he internalized the lessons of power and control. However, Amin's time in the KR also exposed him to the contradictions at the heart of the British Empire. He saw that while the British preached democracy and equality, they practiced a system of racial segregation and exploitation. This realization fueled his growing resentment and sowed the seeds of nationalist sentiment that would later blossom into a desire to overthrow the colonial order. As Amin climbed the ranks of the KR, his brutality became increasingly apparent. He was involved in numerous instances of excessive force, accused of torturing prisoners and massacring civilians during counterinsurgency operations in Kenya and Uganda. His superiors, while recognizing his effectiveness as a soldier, were also disturbed by his growing disregard for human life and his tendency towards gratuitous violence. One particularly chilling incident occurred during the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya, where Amin served as a platoon commander. Tasked with rooting out Mau Mau rebels, Amin's unit was accused of carrying out a series of atrocities against suspected insurgents and their sympathizers. Villages were razed, men were rounded up and executed without trial, and women and children were subjected to horrific acts of violence. Amin's actions during the Mau Mau uprising cemented his reputation as a ruthless and efficient killer. He was feared by his enemies and viewed with a mixture of admiration and apprehension by his fellow soldiers. His superiors, recognizing his potential as a weapon to be wielded against their enemies, often turned a blind eye to his excesses, promoting him through the ranks despite his growing list of alleged war crimes. Despite his brutality, Amin was also a shrewd operator, cultivating relationships with both his British superiors and his fellow African soldiers. He understood the nuances of power within the colonial system, using his position to amass wealth and influence. He forged alliances with powerful figures, both within the military and in the burgeoning independence movement sweeping across Africa, laying the groundwork for his eventual seizure of power. The King's African Rifles, despite its role as an instrument of colonial control, inadvertently became a crucible for African nationalism. As more and more Africans gained military experience and witnessed the hypocrisy of British rule, a sense of resentment and a desire for self-determination began to grow within the ranks. Amin, despite his loyalty to the British Crown and his willingness to use violence to maintain colonial order, was not immune to these nationalist sentiments. He saw the winds of change sweeping across Africa as colony after colony demanded independence. He understood that the old order was crumbling, and he began to position himself to seize power in the post-colonial era. Amin's growing nationalist sympathies did not diminish his ruthlessness or his ambition. He saw the impending collapse of British rule not as a threat, but as an opportunity to seize power for himself. He cultivated relationships with key figures in the Ugandan independence movement, presenting himself as a strongman, capable of uniting the country and leading it to prosperity. As Uganda moved closer to independence, Amin's position within the KR became increasingly untenable. His British superiors, wary of his growing influence and his unpredictable nature, sought to sideline him, fearing that he might use his military experience to stage a coup. However, they had underestimated Amin's cunning and his ability to exploit the volatile political situation to his advantage. In 1962, Uganda finally achieved independence, ending decades of British colonial rule. Milton Obote, a charismatic leader who had emerged as a leading figure in the independence movement, became the country's first Prime Minister. The nation was filled with hope and optimism, but also with uncertainty about the challenges that lay ahead. Amin, recognizing the shifting political landscape, saw an opportunity to advance his own ambitions. He had cultivated a close relationship with Obote, using his military experience and his network of contacts to help consolidate the new government's power. Obote, in turn, saw Amin as a valuable ally, appointing him commander of the Ugandan army, a position that gave him significant control over the country's security forces. Despite his outward loyalty to Obote, Amin harbored his own ambitions for power. He saw the fragility of the newly independent nation and the deep ethnic and regional divisions that threatened to tear it apart. He believed that only a strong man, someone willing to use any means necessary to maintain order, could guide Uganda through these turbulent times. As Obote's government faced growing opposition from within its own ranks, Amin began to consolidate his power within the military. He purged officers loyal to Obote, replacing them with men who owed their allegiance to him. He expanded the army, recruiting heavily from his own ethnic group, the Kakwa, and from other marginalized communities, ensuring that his power base was not dependent on the traditional centers of power. The stage was set for a showdown, a power struggle that would plunge Uganda into an abyss of violence and terror. The fragile peace of newly independent Uganda began to crack under the weight of Amin's ambition. His relationship with Obote, once one of mutual benefit, devolved into a dangerous dance of suspicion and rivalry. Amin, never content with remaining in the shadows, chafed under Obote's leadership, his thirst for power growing with each passing day. Obote, acutely aware of Amin's growing influence and ruthlessness, began to see his former protégé as a threat. Reports of Amin's excesses, his brutal methods, and his growing network of loyalists within the army reached Obote's ears, fueling his paranoia and pushing him to act. The alliance that had once held such promise was now a powder keg, primed for a violent detonation. Sensing the shift in Obote's attitude, Amin began to fortify his own position. He surrounded himself with loyal officers, many drawn from his own Kakwa ethnic group, and tightened his grip on the army. He exploited existing ethnic tensions, portraying himself as a protector of marginalized communities against Obote's perceived favoritism towards his own ethnic group, the Langi. The seeds of discord sown by ambition and nurtured by fear were taking root. Uganda, still grappling with the challenges of independence, found itself on the precipice of disaster, teetering on the edge of a power struggle that would shatter its fragile peace and usher in an era of unimaginable darkness. As tensions between Obote and Amin escalated, Uganda was gripped by unease. Obote, isolated and distrustful, surrounded himself with loyal units, relying on intelligence reports of Amin's treachery. Amin, feigning loyalty, solidified his support within the army and spread dissent. In 1970, Obote's attempt to arrest Amin backfired, setting the stage for a coup. On January 25, 1971, while Obote was in Singapore, Amin struck. Amin's forces seized control of Kampala, declaring him President of Uganda. The coup marked a turning point, replacing hopes of independence with fear and uncertainty. After the coup, Amin presented himself as a liberator, promising peace and prosperity. However, he swiftly consolidated power, purging threats and creating a network of informants. Amin's true nature emerged as he awarded himself grandiose titles. Uganda, once hopeful, was now under a tyrant's rule. Amin's reign of terror decimated Uganda. He expelled the Asian community, leading to economic collapse. Amin's bizarre foreign policy adventures alienated allies. Uganda became a pariah state under his brutal rule. Amin's rule morphed into outright tyranny. The security forces silenced dissent with impunity. Amin's reign of terror left an indelible scar on Uganda. Amin's paranoia targeted anyone perceived as a threat. Purges engulfed the military, civil service, and judiciary. Intellectuals and ethnic groups were silenced and targeted. Uganda was torn apart by Amin's hatred. Whispers of resistance began to echo through the darkness. Small groups risked their lives to defy Amin's regime. Despite the odds, the resistance persisted, a testament to the human spirit. Dissent under Amin was met with torture, disappearance, or death. Prisons became nightmarish hellscapes. Fear permeated Ugandan society, stifling creativity and hope. Amin's policies plunged Uganda into poverty and despair. The expulsion of the Asian community led to economic collapse. Uganda was held hostage by fear and poverty. The Entebbe raid in 1976 was a dramatic chapter in Amin's reign. Amin's support for hijackers stunned the international community. The raid exposed Amin's weaknesses and increased his isolation. Amin's foreign policy was erratic and unpredictable. His relationships with the UK and Israel soured after the Entebbe crisis. Amin's bizarre diplomatic gestures further isolated Uganda. As Western support dwindled, Amin turned to Libya's Gaddafi. Libyan aid bolstered Amin's military capabilities but made Uganda dependent. This dependency made Uganda vulnerable to shifts in Libyan policy. As Amin's regime progressed, his international image shifted from that of a potential post-colonial leader to a pariah. The brutalities of his regime were no longer Africa's secret. They were global knowledge, thanks largely to the fleeing Ugandan diaspora who told of atrocities. Western media outlets, once only mildly critical, began to portray Amin as a buffoon and a butcher, an image that stuck and further isolated Uganda. The Entebbe raid was particularly damaging. It showcased not only his support for international terrorism, but also highlighted his regime's brutality in dealing with the aftermath, including the massacre of airport staff and a suspected informant within his army. These actions drew widespread condemnation, leading to Uganda's increasing isolation from the international community. This isolation was compounded by Amin's continued erratic declarations. His claim to be the King of Scotland and his unsolicited advice to other nations' leaders made him a subject of international ridicule, undermining any serious discussion of Uganda's policy or political stance. Idi Amin's self-bestowed titles and bizarre public pronouncements contributed significantly to his caricature-like image internationally. Proclaiming himself as the King of Scotland and conqueror of the British Empire were part of a broader strategy to elevate his status in the eyes of his supporters and to mock the colonial powers that had once dominated Uganda. However, these actions bewildered the global audience and detracted from the serious issues facing Uganda. His public statements often verged on the absurd, such as his declaration of a cure for AIDS that involved oranges and lemons, or his offer to judge the Miss Universe contest. These proclamations were met with a mix of amusement and horror on the international stage, as they highlighted not just his lack of diplomacy, but also hinted at the chaotic nature of his rule. Despite their comical overtones, these pronouncements had a dark side. They were part of a broader pattern of megalomania and unpredictability that made diplomatic relations with Uganda extremely challenging. The international community, already wary of his human rights abuses, found further reasons to distance themselves from Amin's regime. The blend of brutality and bizarre antics defined Amin's rule, making him one of the most infamous dictators of the 20th century. His legacy, marked by violence and eccentricity, continues to influence perceptions of Uganda long after his fall from power. By 1978, the walls were closing in on Idi Amin's regime. Years of brutal repression, economic mismanagement, and international isolation had taken their toll. Amin's grip on power, once seemingly unshakable, began to weaken as internal dissent grew and external pressure mounted. The final straw came in October 1978, when, in a move that can only be described as an act of supreme arrogance and miscalculation, Amin ordered the invasion of the Kagera region of neighboring Tanzania. He believed that a swift military victory would bolster his flagging popularity and distract from his regime's mounting problems. He could not have been more wrong. The Tanzanian army, under the leadership of Julius Nyerere, a staunch critic of Amin's regime, responded with a ferocity that surprised even Amin's most ardent supporters. Bolstered by Ugandan exiles eager to liberate their homeland from tyranny, the Tanzanian forces routed Amin's demoralized and ill-equipped army, pushing deep into Ugandan territory. Amin, caught off guard by the swiftness and ferocity of the Tanzanian response, found himself increasingly isolated, his regime crumbling around him. The dictator who had once seemed invincible was now facing his own mortality. As the Tanzanian army, along with their Ugandan allies, advanced towards Kampala, Amin's grip on power disintegrated. His inner circle, once composed of loyalists and sycophants, abandoned him, fleeing the country with whatever wealth they could salvage from the wreckage of his regime. On April 11, 1979, after weeks of heavy fighting, Kampala fell to the Tanzanian-led forces. Amin, his dreams of empire shattered, fled his capital in disgrace, his whereabouts unknown. The reign of terror that had held Uganda captive for 8 long years was finally over. The scenes of jubilation that greeted the fall of Amin's regime were tempered by the sobering reality of what lay ahead. Uganda was in ruins, its economy shattered, its social fabric torn apart, its people traumatized by years of violence and oppression. The task of rebuilding the nation would be monumental, a challenge made all the more daunting by the legacy of Amin's brutality, a legacy that would continue to haunt Uganda for decades to come. Idi Amin, the self-proclaimed conqueror of the British Empire, was reduced to a fugitive, his dreams of power and glory lying in ruins. He fled Uganda with a handful of loyal followers, his final destination uncertain, his future bleak. He initially sought refuge in Libya, welcomed by his former ally Muammar Gaddafi, who, despite his own brutal tendencies, recognized the political liability of harboring a fallen dictator. Amin's stay in Libya was short-lived, and he was soon forced to move on, his movements shrouded in secrecy. In 1980, Amin found himself in Saudi Arabia, granted asylum by the Saudi royal family. The Saudis, motivated by a complex mix of political calculations and a desire to avoid a repeat of the Iranian Revolution, allowed Amin to live out his days in relative comfort, but under strict conditions. He was forbidden from engaging in political activities, his movements were monitored, and he was effectively silenced, his voice no longer able to incite violence or sow discord. Idi Amin lived out his days in Saudi Arabia, a shadow of his former self, haunted by the ghosts of his victims, his name forever etched in the annals of history as a symbol of tyranny and brutality. He died in exile on August 16, 2003, at the age of 78, his death largely unnoticed by the world that had long forgotten the once feared dictator. Amin died without ever facing justice for the atrocities committed under his regime. He never expressed remorse for the countless lives lost, the families torn apart, the nation shattered by his insatiable thirst for power and his utter disregard for human life. He died as he had lived, a tyrant unrepentant, his legacy a stain on the conscience of humanity. Idi Amin's story is a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, the seductive allure of demagoguery, and the human capacity for both great good and unimaginable evil. The silence that followed Idi Amin's death was deafening. There were no grand pronouncements of justice served, no cathartic trials to hold him accountable for his crimes. The world, it seemed, was content to let the dictator fade into obscurity. His victims denied even the solace of seeing their tormentor face judgment. But the silence was deceptive, for beneath the surface, the wounds inflicted by Amin's reign of terror continued to fester. The scars of torture, the pain of loss, The memories of loved ones vanished. These were not so easily erased. They lingered in the hearts of survivors, a constant reminder of the fragility of peace and the enduring legacy of trauma. The international community, too, bore a share of the responsibility for the silence. The West, which had initially supported Amin, had turned a blind eye to his excesses, valuing strategic interests over human rights. The Cold War, with its cynical calculus of power, had provided cover for Amin's atrocities, transforming Uganda into a pawn in a global game of chess. The price of silence was steep, paid for in the currency of justice denied and accountability deferred. It was a price borne not only by the Ugandan people, but by the conscience of humanity, a stark reminder of the consequences of indifference in the face of evil. The echoes of Amin's tyranny reverberate through Uganda even today. The nation has made remarkable progress in the decades since his downfall, rebuilding its economy, strengthening its democratic institutions, and fostering a sense of national unity. But the past casts a long shadow, a haunting reminder of the fragility of peace and the ever-present potential for darkness to resurface. Corruption, a hallmark of Amin's regime, continues to plague Uganda, undermining the rule of law and eroding public trust. Ethnic tensions, exploited by Amin to divide and conquer, still simmer beneath the surface, a potent reminder of the fragility of national unity. The legacy of Amin's reign of terror serves as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that the fight for freedom and justice is never truly over. It highlights the importance of strong institutions, respect for human rights, and a commitment to the rule of law as bulwarks against tyranny. The echoes of Amin's brutality are a call to action, a reminder that silence is not an option when faced with injustice, and that the responsibility to safeguard freedom rests on the shoulders of every generation. Despite the profound trauma inflicted by Amin's regime, the spirit of the Ugandan people has proven to be indomitable. With remarkable resilience, they embarked on the arduous task of rebuilding their shattered nation, piece by piece, brick by brick. The journey has been long and arduous, marked by setbacks and challenges. The scars of Amin's brutality run deep, and the ghosts of the past linger. Yet through it all, the Ugandan people have shown an unwavering determination to overcome adversity and to forge a brighter future for themselves and their children. Uganda today is a nation transformed. Its economy, once in ruins, is now one of the fastest growing in Africa. Its people, once cowed by fear, are now embracing democratic principles, demanding accountability from their leaders and raising their voices in pursuit of justice and equality. The journey is far from over, but the progress made is a testament to the enduring spirit of the Ugandan people, their unwavering belief in a better tomorrow, and their refusal to let the darkness of the past extinguish the flame of hope. The legacy of Idi Amin is a complex and multifaceted one. He is remembered as a brutal dictator, a tyrant who inflicted unimaginable suffering on his own people. But he is also a product of his time. A man whose rise to power was facilitated by the forces of colonialism, Cold War politics, and the fragility of newly independent African nations. Amin's reign of terror serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, the seductive allure of demagoguery, and the ease with which societies can succumb to fear and hatred. His legacy is a cautionary tale, a warning to future generations to be vigilant in the face of oppression, to cherish freedom, and to never take peace for granted. But Amin's legacy is not solely defined by the darkness he unleashed. It also serves as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of hope, and the unwavering determination of a people to overcome even the most unimaginable adversity. The Ugandan people, who endured the horrors of Amin's regime, have emerged from the ashes of tyranny with a renewed appreciation for freedom, a commitment to democracy, and an unwavering belief in the power of human dignity to triumph over evil. The story of Idi Amin is not just a chapter in Uganda's past, but a stark reminder that the struggle for freedom and justice is a perpetual one. It is a struggle that transcends borders, ideologies, and generations. A struggle that requires constant vigilance, unwavering courage, and an unyielding belief in the inherent dignity of every human being. The lessons learned from Amin's reign of terror are as relevant today as they were decades ago. They remind us that power, unchecked, corrupts, that fear is a weapon that can be wielded to devastating effect, and that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. The fight for a more just and equitable world is a collective one, a shared responsibility that requires us to confront injustice wherever it may arise, to speak out against oppression, and to stand in solidarity with those who are denied their fundamental rights. The legacy of Idi Amin, for all its darkness, can help to illuminate the path towards a brighter future. A future where tyranny is relegated to the dustbin of history, and where the principles of freedom, justice, and human dignity reign supreme. We hope you've enjoyed Idi Amin, the Tyrant of Uganda, a deep dive, the second episode in our documentary series about the 20th and 21st century's notorious dictators. As we reflect on the enduring struggle for justice, it's crucial to acknowledge how history is memorialized in popular culture. One of the most notable portrayals of Idi Amin was brought to the silver screen in the critically acclaimed film The Last King of Scotland. Forrest Whitaker's Oscar-winning performance as Amin was lauded for its depth and intensity, capturing the complexity of a dictator who was both charismatic and terrifying. Whitaker's portrayal was a tour de force, a chilling reminder of the human capacity for both charm and cruelty. However, the cinematic representation of such figures raises an uncomfortable question. Should these dictators be immortalized in cinema while their heinous acts go unpunished? The portrayal of Amin in The Last King of Scotland brings his brutal legacy into the public consciousness, but it also risks simplifying the profound suffering inflicted on countless lives. While films like these can educate and bring awareness, there's a fine line between representation and glorification. It's vital that these stories are told with the gravity they deserve, ensuring that the focus remains on the victims and the lessons we must learn to prevent such atrocities from recurring. As viewers, we must engage critically with these portrayals, recognizing the real-life horrors behind the on-screen drama. The story of Idi Amin is not just a tale for the movies, it's a somber chapter of human history that calls for justice and remembrance. The legacy of Idi Amin, as depicted in The Last King of Scotland, should serve as a stark reminder of the importance of accountability and the need for an unwavering commitment to human rights. Let us honor the memories of those who suffered by ensuring that history never forgets and that such tyranny is never repeated. If you found value in this exploration of history and its portrayal in media, please like and subscribe to our channel. This docuseries is brought to you by Verum Magazine and Kayleen Peoples, the editor-in-chief. All images in this video were used for informational purposes only and fall under the Fair Use Act of 1976. Thank you for watching.